The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished floors, reflecting back 1,000 fractured smiles. My parents' retirement gala. A night meant to celebrate 2 lifetimes building an empire from nothing, a legacy I had always believed was being built for me, with me. I stood near the back, a quiet observer in the opulent spectacle, watching my mother glide towards the microphone on the stage. Her smile was wide, performative, the kind she reserved for cameras and shareholders. Beside her, my father, looking smaller than usual, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. And then my brother, standing just behind them, beaming, a preening, self-satisfied smirk already playing on his lips. The kind of smirk I'd seen 1,000 times, usually right before he took credit for something I'd done. A knot began to tighten in my stomach, cold and hard, despite the warmth of the room. This wasn't just a celebration. This was the moment the torch was passed. The moment decades of work, of dedication, of quiet sacrifice would culminate. My mother cleared her throat, her voice amplified, cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. Everyone leaned in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it. My future, laid out under the dazzling lights. But the words that came next were not the ones I'd spent my life preparing for. They were a hammer blow. A seismic shock that shattered the glittering façade of the night and everything I thought I knew. If you've ever felt the ground disappear from under you, tell me about it in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before the gala had been a study in quiet purpose. Our company wasn't just a business. It was the third sibling in our family, demanding constant attention, nurturing, and sacrifice. Growing up, the dinner table conversations revolved around market shares, production quotas, the latest industry challenges. Toys were secondary to blueprints. Fairy tales replaced by case studies. My brother, older by 3 years, was the golden child, the one who charmed outsiders, who could work a room with effortless grace. I was the meticulous one, the one who stayed late, who pored over spreadsheets, who understood the intricate machinery of the business from the inside out. I didn't crave the spotlight. I craved the substance. I wanted to build, to innovate, to ensure the legacy wasn't just maintained, but grown, stronger, more resilient. My father, the founder, a man of quiet strength and sharper intellect, seemed to see this in me. He'd often pull me aside, talking strategy, sharing his vision for the future, dropping subtle hints about leadership. My mother, on the other hand, was the social architect, the one who curated the family image, who believed presentation trumped all else. Her affections, her approval, seemed to flow more naturally towards my brother, the charismatic front man. But the business? That was different. That was serious. And in the serious conversations, the ones that mattered, my father always turned to me. The unspoken understanding hung in the air, a silent promise passed between us in the quiet moments after my brother had left to chase some fleeting pleasure. The company would be mine. The future rested on my shoulders. I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as my destiny. I embraced it, willingly, eagerly, pouring my life into every aspect of the business, learning it inside and out, mastering its complexities. I earned my place, not through charm or lineage alone, but through sheer, unadulterated work and a deep, abiding respect for the enterprise my parents had created. This gala wasn't just my parents' send-off. It was my coronation, the public acknowledgement of the path I had been walking my entire life. Then came the words, clear, ringing, and utterly devastating. My mother, smiling broadly, her eyes fixed on my brother, standing tall and smug beside her, spoke into the microphone. And tonight, as we look to the future, we are thrilled to announce the man who will lead our company into its next glorious chapter. My son, David. The world tilted. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. David. Not me. David. My brother, who saw the company as a playground, a source of prestige, not a responsibility. David, who preferred delegate to do, who measured success in headlines, not balance sheets. David. I stood frozen, the knot in my stomach twisting into a vice. The smile on my mother's face was beatific, triumphant. The pride in her eyes was blinding. It was a pride I had yearned for, worked for, my entire life, only to see it lavished on him for a role he hadn't earned, couldn't possibly fulfill. My brother stepped forward, accepting the accolades, the handshakes, the back pats. He played the part perfectly, the confident successor, the natural leader. But it was a performance. A hollow, empty performance staged on the ruins of my expectations. The betrayal wasn't just in the announcement. It was in the silence that followed it for my father. He just stood there, a faint smile now on his lips, clapping along with everyone else. He didn't meet my eyes. He didn't offer a flicker of explanation or regret. Just complicity. In that moment, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the chandeliers, surrounded by smiling faces that now felt like a judgmental jury, I understood. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This was planned, orchestrated. A calculated move to sideline me, to erase my years of work, to install their golden boy on the throne, regardless of merit or the health of the company. The pain was sharp, physical. It felt like being stabbed in the gut, the air forced out of my lungs. Humiliation washed over me, hot and searing, quickly followed by a cold, bottomless despair. My own family. My mother. My father. My brother. They hadn't just chosen someone else. They had actively chosen against me, in the most public, most brutal way imaginable. The smiles around me seemed to mock my naivety. How could I have been so blind? So trusting? The gala continued, a blur of polite conversation and forced cheer. But for me, the party was over. The future I had envisioned had evaporated, replaced by a gaping void. I needed air. I needed to escape the suffocating weight of their betrayal, the crushing realization that the people I loved most had just delivered the most devastating blow of my life. I turned, my movements stiff, robotic, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the shattered fragments of my world on the polished ballroom floor. The days that followed the gala were a descent into a different kind of reality. The air at the office felt thinner, colder. The smiles felt tighter. My colleagues, the people I'd worked alongside for years, looked at me with a mixture of pity and awkwardness. Some avoided my gaze entirely. Others offered hushed condolences, muttering about politics and unfairness. It felt like walking through a ghost town where everyone could see you, but no one could truly help. My brother, David, settled into his new role with nauseating ease. He strutted through the hallways, held impromptu meetings he hadn't prepared for, and made grand, sweeping statements about his vision for the company, a vision I knew was lifted directly from presentations I had created months ago. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He looked entitled, as if this had been his all along, and I had merely been keeping the seat warm. The most painful interactions were with my parents. My mother called, her voice falsely cheerful, asking if I was settling into my new role, a vaguely defined position she had created for me, something involving special projects, a clear demotion designed to keep me busy and out of the way. When I pressed her, gently at first, then with growing desperation, about the gala, about the decision, her tone hardened. "David is ready," she'd say, as if repeating a rehearsed line. "He has the charisma the company needs now. You're brilliant, of course, darling, just in a different way. This is for the best. Trust us, trust?" The word tasted like ash in my mouth. My father was worse. He wouldn't talk about it at all. If I brought it up, he would change the subject or sigh heavily and say, "It's done. We need to move forward." His silence was a heavier judgment than my mother's hollow justifications. It confirmed his complicity, his deliberate turning away from the son he had once guided, in favor of the son his wife preferred. I felt like a stranger in my own home, my own company. My attempts to contribute were met with polite dismissal or outright obstruction. My emails were ignored. My calls weren't returned. I was being systematically frozen out, isolated, pushed to the periphery. It wasn't just professional rejection, it was a profound personal abandonment. They weren't just taking away my future, they were erasing my past, rewriting the narrative of my contribution, making me feel like an imposter in the life I had built. The quiet purpose that had defined me began to erode, replaced by a gnawing emptiness and a creeping sense of hopelessness. How do you fight against the people who are supposed to be your foundation? How do you reclaim a future that has been stolen by the very hands that were meant to guide you towards it? The ground felt impossibly far away, and I was free-falling with no net in sight. Every day was a fresh reminder of the betrayal, a constant low hum of pain and confusion. I started doubting myself. Was I not good enough? Had I misunderstood everything? Was my brother truly the better choice, despite all evidence to the contrary? The isolation was a weapon in itself. They had successfully cut me off from the network of relationships within the company, the informal channels of information and support. People were afraid to be seen talking to me, afraid of attracting the attention of the new regime. The loyalty I had built over years seemed to evaporate overnight, replaced by a primal instinct for self-preservation. The office, once a place of purpose and belonging, became a battleground where every interaction felt like a test, every smile a potential mask for malicious intent. My carefully constructed world was collapsing, piece by painful piece. The crisis deepened with chilling efficiency. It wasn't enough that I had been sidelined. They began actively undermining me, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness. Projects I had spearheaded were rebranded under my brother's name. Key personnel I had mentored were transferred to his team, their reporting lines shifted away from mine. There were whispers, carefully leaked rumors, about my lack of leadership potential, my difficulty with people, even veiled suggestions of instability after the Gala announcement. My mother and brother were a formidable, if toxic, team. She handled the perception, the narrative, using her social connections and influence on the board. He handled the operational side, making arbitrary decisions that often disrupted workflow and alienated experienced staff, but which served his purpose of consolidating power and pushing me further out. My father remained a ghost, present but absent, observing the destruction with a passive detachment that wounded me more deeply than any active malice. I tried to fight back using the established channels, appealing to HR, to the board members I knew and respected. But my concerns were met with polite stonewalling. It's a transitional phase, they'd say. David is finding his feet, or, more pointedly, perhaps you should focus on your new responsibilities. It was clear their loyalty had shifted, or perhaps it had never been with me to begin with. My brother started scheduling meetings with me that were less about work and more about asserting his authority. He'd lean back in his chair, a smug grin on his face, and lecture me on company strategy, condescendingly explaining concepts I had taught him years ago. He enjoyed my discomfort, my forced politeness. He wanted to see me squirm. "You know," he said one afternoon, "Mother and Father just felt you weren't quite ready." A bit intense, perhaps? The company needs a steady hand, someone who can connect with people. The irony was brutal. He had no genuine connection with anyone. He had only superficial charm. I felt trapped, suffocating. Every avenue seemed blocked. Every attempt to regain a foothold was met with resistance. They were systematically dismantling my position, eroding my credibility, preparing the ground to push me out entirely. The thought became a cold certainty. They wouldn't stop until I was gone. Physically gone from the company I had dedicated my life to. The despair was a heavy shroud, muffling everything, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. All seemed truly lost. The family was broken beyond repair. The career I had built was being stolen. The future I had believed in was gone. The city lights outside my window blurred through a film of unshed tears. I was alone, betrayed, and rapidly running out of options. The empire my parents had built was becoming my cage, and the bars were closing in. I replayed every conversation, every subtle slight, every moment I had missed the warning signs. How could I have been so blind? The favoritism had always been there, but I had dismissed it as typical sibling dynamics, convinced that when it came to the serious business of the company, merit would prevail. I had been wrong. Terribly, painfully wrong. Merit was irrelevant. The game was rigged, the outcome decided long before the gala began. I was an inconvenient obstacle, a loose end they needed to tie up. The pressure intensified. My mother started making thinly veiled suggestions about me needing a change of pace, perhaps taking some time off, or exploring other opportunities. The message was clear. Leave. The constant feeling of being watched, judged, and plotted against was exhausting. Sleep offered little respite. My dreams were filled with echoing ballrooms and mocking laughter. My home, once a sanctuary, felt empty and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth and belonging I had once felt within the company walls. The company was my home, my chosen family, and now it felt like I was being evicted. The emotional toll was immense. I felt raw, exposed, vulnerable. The betrayal had stripped away layers of self-confidence, leaving me feeling small and inadequate. The narrative they were weaving about me, the one about my supposed inability to lead, my lack of charisma, began to insidiously worm its way into my own thoughts. Was it true? Was I just a detail-oriented drone, lacking the spark needed for leadership? The self-doubt was another weapon, wielded effectively by their relentless pressure campaign. They weren't just trying to push me out, they were trying to break me, to make me believe I deserved this fate, that I was incapable of anything more. And for a time it worked. I felt my spirit dimming, my resolve weakening. The prospect of fighting back felt impossible, a lonely, futile charge against an entrenched enemy that knew all my weaknesses because they had helped create them. There were days I considered giving up, walking away, disappearing. The thought was tempting, a promise of escape from the suffocating tension, the constant pain. But then, I would look at the company logo, emblazoned on buildings, on stationery, on the smallest internal memos. It wasn't just their company, it was mine too. I had poured years of my life into it. I had built departments, solved crises, laid the groundwork for innovations they couldn't even comprehend. And more importantly, I saw what David was doing to it. The corners he was cutting, the short-sighted decisions, the utter disregard for the long-term health of the business in favor of quick wins and personal glory. He wasn't fit to lead. His leadership would not only ruin the company, it would tarnish my father's legacy, the legacy I actually respected and wanted to protect. And that thought, that fierce protectiveness, ignited a spark in the dying embers of my resolve. I wouldn't let them destroy it. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them break me. The anger, suppressed for so long by shock and grief, finally surged, hot and cleansing. It burned away the self-doubt, the pity, the despair. It left behind a hard, cold determination. They wanted a fight? I would give them one. But I wouldn't fight on their terms. I wouldn't get into a public shouting match, wouldn't engage in petty office politics. I would fight smart. I would use the skills they dismissed, my attention to detail, my understanding of the company's intricate workings, my ability to see patterns others missed. They had underestimated me. They had believed their own narrative of my inadequacy. That was their first and biggest mistake. My turning point wasn't a sudden dramatic decision. It was a quiet, internal recalibration. It was accepting the loneliness of the fight, embracing the necessity of working in the shadows, just like I had always preferred to work anyway. The pain of their betrayal was still there, a raw wound, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. It gave me a clarity I hadn't possessed before. They wanted to push me out? I would make it impossible. They wanted to rewrite the narrative? I would expose their lies. They wanted David on the throne? I would reveal him for the incompetent fraud he was. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, far more dangerous phase. And this time I would be the one setting the rules. I started working differently. My official duties were minimal, so I used that time to delve into the company's archives. I reviewed old contracts, internal memos, financial records, personnel files. I wasn't looking for dirt in the conventional sense. I was looking for truth, for patterns, for the foundational elements they had built upon and, perhaps, overlooked. I worked late, alone in my office, the silence a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the company during the day. My isolation became a strength, No one watched me. No one questioned my activities. They thought I was defeated, licking my wounds. Let them think that. It was the perfect cover. I reconnected, cautiously, with a few trusted allies, people who had also been marginalized or disillusioned by David's takeover. We met in quiet cafes, spoke in hushed tones, sharing observations, piecing together the puzzle. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. David wasn't just incompetent. He was reckless. He was making decisions based on personal favors, cutting deals that benefited his friends, and ignoring established protocols. My mother, in her zeal to install him, was enabling his destructive behavior, overruling experienced executives who raised concerns. My father, it seemed, was either willfully blind or too tired to intervene, content to let his wife manage the transition, even if it meant risking the company's stability. The evidence wasn't just anecdotal. I found the paper trails. Emails, meeting minutes, and signed contracts, expense reports that revealed a pattern of mismanagement and potential malfeasance. It wasn't a smoking gun yet, but it was leading me towards one. The feeling of dread was replaced by a cold, focused energy. I wasn't operating on emotion anymore. I was operating on logic, on evidence, on strategy. I was building my case, piece by painstaking piece, in the shadows they had forced me into. The deeper I dug, the more complex the web of their actions became. It wasn't just favoritism. There were layers of deception, misdirection, and a startling level of amateurishness that was genuinely frightening for the future of the company. They were so confident in their power, so dismissive of any potential challenge, that they had left gaping holes in their plan. And I was finding them all. The late nights blurred together. Coffee became my only companion. The outside world faded away. My focus narrowed to the documents in front of me, the connections between disparate pieces of information. I felt like a detective, uncovering a crime committed in plain sight. And the crime wasn't just against me. It was against the company itself, against the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on its health, against the legacy my father had worked so hard to build. That realization added another layer of urgency, another spike of determination. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a matter of professional and moral obligation. I had the knowledge, the skills, and now the motivation to stop them. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a clear, damning picture. But I couldn't just expose it haphazardly. That would lead to chaos, to legal battles that could drag on for years, damaging the company's reputation irreparably. I needed to strike at the right moment, in the right place, with maximum impact. And I needed to use their own confidence, their own hubris, against them. They expected me to whine, to plead, perhaps to resign in a fit of pique. They didn't expect me to fight back using the very system they thought they controlled. I thought about the board meeting. The one where the CEO was formally appointed. It was coming up soon. That was the stage. The question was, how to make the reveal not just effective but utterly undeniable, a turning of the tables so complete that they couldn't possibly recover? I needed something that would shift the balance of power instantly, irrevocably. Something they wouldn't see coming until it was too late. The key wasn't just having the evidence. It was presenting it in a way that preempted their defenses, invalidated their authority, and simultaneously positioned me as the only viable, trustworthy leader. It was a complex equation, one that required not just evidence, but strategy, timing, and a cold, unwavering nerve. I practiced my approach, rehearsing scenarios in my head, anticipating their reactions. I couldn't afford to be emotional. I had to be precise, factual, devastatingly calm. This wasn't revenge. It was a surgical strike. The morning of the board meeting arrived shrouded in a cold, impersonal rain. The sky was the color of bruised concrete. Inside the boardroom, however, the atmosphere was tense, expectant. My mother sat near the head of the table, radiating an almost smug confidence. My brother, David, was beside her, looking slightly nervous, but trying to project an air of casual authority. Board members were filing in, taking their seats, exchanging quiet greetings. I sat towards the end of the table, in the seat usually reserved for observers, my presence likely seen by my mother and brother as a final, pathetic attempt to cling to relevance. Let them think that. I held my leather brief in my lap, its weight familiar and reassuring. Inside were the paper trails, the undeniable evidence, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and ready. The meeting began with formalities, quickly moving to the agenda item everyone was waiting for, the formal ratification of David as the new CEO. My mother, as chair of the board, introduced the item, her voice smooth and confident, extolling David's virtues, painting a picture of a dynamic leader poised to take the company to new heights. David shifted in his seat, puffing out his chest slightly. A few board members nodded along. It was a formality, a done deal. They had the votes. This was simply the public confirmation, the final nail in my professional coffin. The motion was put forward. A board member seconded it. My mother opened the floor for discussion. There was a polite silence. No one spoke. Why would they? The script was written. The outcome predetermined. My mother smiled, ready to call for the vote. But then, I cleared my throat. The sound, small in itself, seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. All eyes turned to me. My mother's smile faltered, replaced by a look of irritation. David's smugness vanished, replaced by wary confusion. I have a few points I'd like to raise before the vote, I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. My mother's eyes narrowed. This isn't the appropriate time, she said, her voice sharp. We are voting on the CEO appointment, precisely, I replied. And the board needs to be fully informed before making such a critical decision. There are considerations that have not been fully disclosed. A ripple went through the room. Board members exchanged glances. My father, seated silently down the table, finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. What considerations? My mother demanded, her composure starting to crack. Matters pertaining to David's suitability and, indeed, his actions since assuming de facto leadership, I stated, pulling out a bound document from my brief. I have here a report detailing irregularities in several recent contracts, unauthorized expenditures, and instances of gross mismanagement that have already cost the company significant resources and exposed us to considerable legal risk. I began to cite specific examples, referencing page numbers in the document I had distributed to each board member moments before sitting down. My voice remained calm, factual, laying out the evidence in precise, irrefutable detail. I presented the emails, the financial records, the internal communications that painted a damning picture of incompetence and potential malfeasance. I showed how David had overruled established procedures to push through deals that benefited his associates, how he had ignored warnings from department heads, how his focus had been solely on short-term gains and personal enrichment, not the company's stability. As I spoke, David's face went from pale to red. He fidgeted, looking desperate, turning to my mother for help. My mother's face was a mask of fury, her eyes spitting venom. She tried to interrupt, to shut me down. These are baseless accusations. Slander, she shrilled. Fabrications. The evidence is here, in your hands, I said, gesturing to the reports on the table. Audited financial records, signed contracts, email chains from company servers. These are not fabrications, Mother. They're facts. Facts that demonstrate a clear pattern of reckless behavior and a fundamental misunderstanding of how this company operates at its core, I continued, detailing specific instances of David's blunders, the millions lost on ill-conceived ventures, the regulatory risks he had ignored. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show anger or triumph. I simply presented the truth, cold and hard. The board members were leaning forward now, poring over the documents, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern, then to alarm. They saw the dates, the figures, the undeniable evidence. This wasn't just office gossip. This was a meticulously documented case of mismanagement on a grand scale, occurring after my brother had been given the reins. Then came the true turning point. I presented the final piece of evidence. Furthermore, I stated, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, this pattern of behavior raises serious questions about fiduciary duty and potential legal liability for the board itself, should these actions go unaddressed. My analysis indicates that several of these transactions could be viewed as detrimental to shareholder value and potentially in violation of corporate governance laws. I paused, letting that sink in. Legal liability. That was the magic word. That shifted the focus from a family squabble to a serious business risk for every person sitting around that table. Their personal fortunes, their reputations, were now on the line. They looked at David, sitting there sweating, unable to offer a coherent defense. They looked at my mother, visibly shaking with rage, her face a mask of disbelief and thwarted ambition. And then they looked at me, calm, prepared, holding the smoking gun. I hadn't just presented evidence of David's incompetence. I had demonstrated that continuing down the path my mother had set would be legally and financially perilous for them. I had used my understanding of the corporate structure, the board's responsibilities, to turn their self-preservation instinct against them. I hadn't just proven David was unfit. I had proven that they were at risk if they appointed him, and by extension, if they allowed my mother's manipulation to continue unchallenged. The proposed motion to appoint David was quietly withdrawn. The air crackled with tension. Board members began to speak, not to my mother, not to David, but to each other in low, urgent tones. They talked about due diligence, about reevaluating the leadership structure, about the seriousness of the findings my mother tried one last time to regain control. This is outrageous. A hostile act. He is trying to steal the company, she shrieked, pointing at me. He manipulated these documents. It's a conspiracy. The documents are verifiable, Mother, I said softly, looking her directly in the eye. And the only conspiracy was the one to install an unqualified individual at the helm of this company. Regardless of the cost, the chairman of the board, a man who had been quiet throughout my presentation, finally spoke, his voice grave. Given the gravity of the issues raised and the undeniable evidence presented, it is clear we cannot proceed with the planned appointment at this time. We need to ensure the stability and integrity of the company. He looked around the table, gauging the mood. In fact, he continued, turning to me, you have demonstrated a remarkable understanding of the company's operations and a clear commitment to its well-being. Furthermore, your meticulous work in uncovering these issues speaks volumes about your capabilities. Perhaps we have been looking at the wrong candidate all along. A murmur of agreement spread through the table. The tides had turned, swiftly and decisively. My mother's face contorted. No, she screamed, the sound raw, guttural, tearing through the boardroom like a physical blow. You can't. David. He is the future. You promised. Her scream hung in the air, a desperate, pathetic wail of a plan collapsing. David sat stunned, his mouth slightly open, utterly blindsided. He hadn't anticipated this level of preparation, this kind of counterstrike. He had believed his ascension was inevitable. They both had. They were so focused on pushing me out, on weaving their narrative of my inadequacy, that they never considered I might be building my own case, gathering my own evidence, preparing to strike where it would hurt the most. I hadn't just blocked David. I had exposed their manipulation, their reckless disregard for the company, and painted myself as the only person capable of navigating the crisis they had created. The chairman cleared his throat again. A motion is on the floor, he announced, his eyes meeting mine. To appoint my name as the new chief executive officer, effective immediately, to address the current challenges and ensure the company's future stability. Silence. Then, one by one, the board members raised their hands. The votes were tallied. It wasn't unanimous, my mother and a few loyalists abstaining in furious silence, but it was overwhelming. The chairman looked at me, a faint, respectful nod acknowledging the unexpected turn of events. The motion carries, he stated. Congratulations, Mr./Miss CEO. My mother let out another choked cry, burying her face in her hands. David pushed his chair back violently, stumbling out of the room without a word, his face a mask of utter defeat. They were blindsided, not just by the vote, but by the quiet, relentless force they had dismissed. The victim had turned the tables, not through anger or public drama, but through cold, hard truth and meticulous preparation. The victory wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, heavy, and profoundly satisfying. The silence, after my mother's scream, was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It hung in the air, thick with shock and the residue of shattered expectations. I didn't feel triumphant, not in a celebratory way.
It was colder than that.
A deep, bone-weary satisfaction. A sense of profound finality. The air in the room began to stir again as board members collected their reports, their faces a mixture of relief, apprehension, and grudging respect. They approached me cautiously, offering congratulations that felt stiff, formal. They knew I had just dismantled the family hierarchy that had governed this company for decades. They saw the wreckage left behind. My father remained seated for a long moment, looking smaller than ever, his face a study in complex emotions I couldn't decipher. Shame? Regret? Relief? He didn't come over to me. He didn't say anything. He simply rose, slowly, and walked out of the room, disappearing without a backward glance. It was perhaps the most definitive statement he could have made about the irreparable damage done. The company was mine now. Legally. Officially. The fight was won. But the cost was everything else. The family dinners, the holiday gatherings, the easy assumption of shared history and loyalty. All of it lay in pieces on the boardroom floor, swept away by the storm I had unleashed. Walking out of that meeting was like stepping into a different world. The rain had stopped. The sun was attempting to break through the clouds, casting a weak, watery light on the wet pavement. The city outside the company doors looked the same, but I was fundamentally changed. The weight of responsibility settled onto my shoulders, heavy and real. My first act wasn't to celebrate, but to call the heads of key departments, the ones I knew were competent and loyal, and reassure them. To start the process of damage control, of righting the ship my brother had veered towards the rocks.
It was a lonely task.
My office, once a place of quiet work, was now the center of power. But the air felt different. Cleaner, perhaps, but also sterile. The triumph was muted by the silence from the people who should have been celebrating with me. My mother didn't call. My brother didn't call. There was no reaching out, no attempt at reconciliation. Just a deafening, absolute silence. The silence of a door slammed shut forever. I knew our relationship, as a family, was over. The betrayal had been too deep, the public humiliation I had been forced to inflict too profound. They would never forgive me for exposing their incompetence, for choosing the health of the company over their misplaced loyalty to David.
And
I didn't know if I could ever forgive them for forcing me into that position, for stealing my future, for shattering my trust so completely. The company thrived under my leadership. I implemented the strategies I had been developing for years, rationalized the chaotic mess David had created, and restored stability and profitability. The employees, sensing a steady hand at the helm, responded with renewed energy. The board, wary but ultimately pragmatic, supported my decisions. I had saved the company. I had proven my worth, not just to them, but to myself. But the victory felt incomplete. Hollowed out by the absence of family, by the knowledge that the very achievement I had worked towards my entire life had cost me the people who were supposed to be my greatest support. Sometimes, sitting in the large, quiet CEO office, I would look out at the city skyline and feel a profound sense of isolation. I had the corner office, the title, the power, everything I had ever worked for. But I was alone. The empire stood tall, a testament to my resilience and strategic mind. But the foundations of family it was built upon had crumbled. The betrayal was a scar I would always carry. The mother's scream, the father's silent departure, the brother's stunned defeat, those moments were etched into my memory, a constant reminder of the price of ambition, the cost of truth. It was a bittersweet victory. I had won, but I had lost my family in the process. And in the quiet moments, surrounded by the symbols of my success, I wasn't always sure which loss was greater. The company was safe. Its future secured. My legacy within it was now undeniable. But the personal emptiness remained, a vast, silent space where family should have been. The lessons were etched in fire. Trust is a fragile thing. easily broken, perhaps never truly rebuilt. Ambition can be a lonely road, and sometimes the greatest battles are fought not in the boardroom, but within the shattered landscape of the human heart. I stood at the window, looking out at the thriving city, at the company buildings standing tall against the horizon. It was mine, all of it. The weight was heavy, but manageable. I had proven my worth. I had defended the legacy. I had survived the betrayal. I was the CEO. And that, for now, had to be enough. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.